Welcome to the Heart of the Matter. I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham. According to a national survey, 25% of women's and 8% of men's lives have been impacted by an almost unspeakable act. Please join us for a closer look at the heart of the matter. According to a survey sponsored by the National Institute of Justice and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, nearly 25% of surveyed women and 8% of surveyed men said they were assaulted by a current or former spouse, cohabitating partner, or date at some time in their lifetime. Recent incidents of attempted murder in Zumbrota and successful homicide in Albert Lea illustrate the ultimate cost to individuals and communities if domestic violence is left unaddressed. Field reporter Donnie Rolls has more on this dangerous issue.
On the evening of January 31st, Zumbrota police were called to this house for something routine.
The officer was called to the scene about 8:30 to do what we call a civil standby.
Often a civil standby is when police go to a residence and watch as a couple separates and one person moves out. In this case, the wife was moving out. The couple had a history of domestic disputes in Lake City, where they lived prior to moving to Zumbrota.
And the female party that was moving out of the residence was moving a number of things out, and tells she had made 2-3 trips.
The officer watched from his car at first.
The last time when the guy came out of the house, he noticed something wasn't right, so he got out of the car and started to walk up to the driveway towards people.
He was spot on. Something was very wrong.
When the male came out of the household, he started firing a pistol at the female, and the officer stepped in and did what he had to do.
The police officer shot and killed the man. The woman was injured by her husband's bullets. She's now recovering from her wounds.
An incident like that happens so fast, it's a matter of seconds, and he just has to take whatever action he can to, neutralize the person.
He says the fatal January shooting serves as a reminder both to officers about the potential dangers of responding to domestic calls and to people in the community. Jason Matichek is an Owatonna patrol officer.
Any call, whether it's domestic violence or even if it's for what you think is a minor traffic stop, could turn drastically violent in a matter of seconds.
This is a rare example of a domestic dispute that turns extremely violent. But while fatal shootings are rare, domestic disputes are not. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. In Zumbrota, police responded to 27 domestic calls in 2010. It's a small number because Zumbrota has a population of only about 3,100 people. Rochester police responded to 686 domestic calls in 2010, and Rochester Police Lieutenant Dan Myres says that number may be conservative because often domestic calls are recoded as something else later. Owatonna police officers responded to 330 domestic calls last year. While these may seem like small numbers, they can have an impact on more than just the friends and families of those involved.
Anytime an incident of this magnitude occurs, it definitely makes an impact on the city.
Thank you for that report, Donnie. In our studio today, we have 3 guests who will help us take a closer look at the heart of this matter. Please welcome psychologist Ellie Wimmerslaw, Tori Miller from the Crime Victims Resource Center, and Paula McCann from the Rochester Women's Shelter. Thanks so much, ladies, for being here today.
Thank you.
Well, we've heard some statistics, we heard some stories. Tell us a little bit about what your opinion is on those statistics, Tori.
Well, I look at statistics as being relative. It's a very underreported crime. Often people don't seek help and they don't talk about it. So the statistics we get, I don't know that there's a lot of weight in what we hear in regards to statistics.
Okay.
It does let us know that it's least that, and that gets some people's attention and gets people talking about it.
Okay. And when we look at those numbers, and maybe they provide more of a baseline comparison rather than true numbers, do we notice those numbers change at all? Are there any environmental factors that cause them to go up or down?
I think I see it, and I've read about it being higher in economic hardships, times of, where it's more pervasive, where a lot of people are stressed, in lower socioeconomic groups oftentimes because they have some of those ongoing stressors. Those are kind of the ones that I think about.
I don't think until it gets severe is it reported. I think that there is a lot of abuse, both verbal and physical, that goes on, and until you've hit that breaking point and that point where you just don't know what to do anymore. You can't help yourself, you can't get out of that situation, then it's reported, then law enforcement's involved.
Okay, well, and let's talk about that continuum of abuse is, we read the headlines are of always the worst, but it doesn't start there. Where does it begin? Give us a sense of the continuum that people experience when they're being abused.
I see a lot of people coming in for counseling who have been in previous relationships that were abusive. They got out and they want to know how not to do that again. And so they're starting a relationship and they're starting to see or report to me some signs of controlling behavior, wondering where the woman is, or controlling the finances, kind of some cutting off, getting jealous of spending time with family or friends, and kind of starting to narrow that down. We're all on our best behavior when we start relationships, and it's as the relationship progresses that you start to see some of these earlier signs coming out. Then you can go all the way to like what we saw in the first thing, where there's weapons and there's violence and there's bruises and death sometimes.
All right. When you also had a personal experience as well as being an advocate now at the women's shelter, do you recognize those things starting, or does it really seem rather innocuous to begin with?
I don't know that you can recognize them initially. Like you kind of said, everyone's on their best behavior initially, and coming out of abusive relationship and now in another one, you want to believe that that's never going to happen to you again, and not every person has those characteristics of being a violent individual.
Is it possible, is there some kind of, I don't want to call it a litmus test, but is there some way for someone to assess at the beginning of a relationship some red flags to look for, something that you would advise people to kind of, hey, be aware of this?
There are red flags. Oftentimes, if you look at women as, let's say, the victims, women oftentimes see some of those red flags as signs of flattery. For instance, jealousy. Oftentimes you'll maybe have a boyfriend who is jealous of other men that you might be friends with or talking to, and sometimes women don't see that sign as a sign of a potential red flag. They see it as, oh, he loves me so much, this is just wonderful, look at, he wants to spend all his time with me. And really that should be something that they really look at seriously. The extreme jealousy, kind of the isolating, wanting them all to themselves, not allowing them to see friends and family.
I had somebody whose partner was jealous of them when they would read, because that took time and attention away from the male who ended up being the abuser. But anything that interfered with that connection was a threat.
Are there any specific characteristics of an abuser, male or female, that you would look to and say, oh, this person has controlling tendencies, or this person comes from a family with a history of abuse, or anything like that people can look for?
Well, coming from a family that has a history of domestic violence or other violence, that becomes the baseline, or that's what they learn, that's what you do with anger, and that's how you show that you love someone or whatever. And so that gets really twisted. So I think that's something to be aware of that's pretty overt.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's definitely, we've seen with our agency being open now for over 30 years, we've seen generations of abusers.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, it is something that is definitely learned, but I also think there's choice involved in it too. I mean, you can choose not to behave that way, but it's one of those things that behaving that way has always been functional and worked for them, so why would they change that behavior?
Does that occur on the victim side as well? Do you find that there are generations that find themselves in those same situations? Do you see mothers and then daughters come through the women's shelter experiencing the same thing?
Sadly, yes. My children were a part of domestic violence for a very short time, but my young son, I see will portray some of those violent tendencies, which have never been a part of my family. I mean, it was a very short part of his life that it affected him. So now that's a barrier we're working through, is kind of redirecting his anger in a healthy way.
Okay.
So
it's important to make that break.
definitely.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little. Why do people stay? Because you do hear about, oh, it'll get better, or they don't necessarily recognize the signs of abuse. Why do people stay in a relationship that is not positive?
Because it is positive sometimes. It looks like it on this, there's a cycle of abuse. I was going to bring an example of it, but, things are good for a while, and then the tension starts to build, and then there's the blow up, the incident, the abuse, and then he apologizes and brings flowers and says, oh, it'll never happen, I'm so sorry. The honeymoon phase.
Okay.
And then you're like, oh, great, it's going to be fine, it's going to be better. And it just starts looping. And you want to believe that they're going to stop, that they didn't want to. So people get caught up in that. If it was always bad, it'd be easy to leave.
It's interesting in some of the information we explored, the things like no contact orders that are issued when these things do finally get reported, that they are not very well respected. And it somewhat illustrates that this is an intimate relationship. These people know each other very well, and so they are less motivated, if that's the right term, to respect those kinds of orders.
I think it depends on the person. I mean, there's certain individuals out there that will say, there's no piece of paper that's going to keep me away from you. And then there's another personality that might say, oh, I can't have any contact with you. You don't call me. You've got this paper. If you want to talk to me, then you need to drop it. So it can be a bargaining chip sometimes too. But I mean, I think it just depends on the individual, because there are some people that will abide by it, and there's others that they just don't care.
They just don't care. Paula, what are the best strategies for getting out? You came to a point and you said that I've had enough and it's time to exit that relationship. What are some of the best strategies that you would recommend to others on getting yourself out of that bad situation?
I think finding a support group is huge. Just having people that are going to be behind you. Domestic violence isn't something even families can easily talk about. Dads don't want to see that their daughters have gone through something like this. So finding that backing of people that can help you get through that is huge, and it's empowering. It truly is. And there are a ton of resources in the communities. It's just getting out there and finding them, and that's hard.
I mean, parents really staying involved with the victim, or if it's a daughter, what have you. I think the worst thing you can do is, as a parent, is to throw up your hands and say, well, you're going back to that abuser, so we're done, we're not helping you anymore, it's over. Once you do that, you cut off that individual's option for escape, an option to leave. So I think it's really important for individuals out there who maybe do have a relative, whether it be a daughter, a granddaughter, it's really important to say, we don't agree with you going back. We know this is a dangerous situation for you. We're concerned for your safety, but we're always going to be here for you when we need you, when you need us.
Give them a lifeline so they don't feel like they don't have any other choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Family involvement was a critical piece in me going from a victim to a survivor.
Okay.
I mean, just having that backing, and no matter how bad things got, I knew they were in my corner, and that helped. I knew I always had somewhere I could turn to.
Dr. Ellie, your businesses as a psychologist, you try to help people modify behaviors and live their best life. Is it possible for someone who is being abusive to recognize that and change? Does that ever happen?
Does it ever happen? I have to believe that it can. If you quote statistics again, very few abusers change. The programs that are out there are not very successful. These behaviors have served them well for years, and there's not a lot of personal motivation to change. If somebody wants to, can they? Yeah. It doesn't happen very often.
What are some resources available to men or women who find themselves in this situation? Who can they turn to for help? You mentioned a support group is critical. Where do you find those people? Are they friends? Do you look to a professional organization? Where can people turn to for help? Tori, your organization provides help?
Yes, I mean, we provide victim advocacy, so there's, we do some short-term crisis counseling. We have a support and educational group for women. hopefully to, help them either get through the situation, or maybe they've already, left their situation, but they still need that support and the education so they don't get into another one. Oftentimes you do see women will go from one abusive relationship to another. And so in the group that we provide, part of our education is hopefully to give them some of those tools so they don't get involved with an abuser again.
Okay, and there are other organizations like yours throughout southern Minnesota and northern Iowa, correct?
Correct, yep. I don't want to say all counties have them, but for the most part, southern Minnesota, I'm not real familiar with what northern Iowa has, but here in southern Minnesota, Olmsted, Fillmore County, Freeborn,
Okay.
Dodge, Steele. Most of them have some type of victim services organization.
Okay. And Paula, from the Battered Women's Shelter in Rochester, that's an immediate help, right? They can leave their place of residence and go there and at least find shelter in the short term.
We can find safe housing immediately, correct.
Okay.
And if we can't, we will relocate to shelters in the surrounding communities.
Okay, all right. So there's kind of a network of folks out there, professionals that can help.
Definitely.
All right, great. Thank you so much, ladies, for sharing your information with us today on this very important topic. Let's find out more about domestic violence calls from Owatonna Police Officer Jason Matichek.
Unfortunately,
Owatonna Police Officer Jason Matichek says when going out on a domestic call, he tries to learn if it's a violent situation, if there are any weapons involved, and if there's any history of calls to that residence involving the same people.
you do have to keep your guard up and be aware of everything that's around you.
He says you never know when a domestic call will happen, but he says they do run in streaks.
Unfortunately, they do increase around the holiday season because that's when
Zumbrota Police Chief Gary Selness says domestics are the most dangerous calls police go out on.
And that's why when we usually go to domestics, we usually have 2 or more officers.
Both Selness and Matichek say if you feel unsafe in a domestic situation or you think a neighbor is in danger, you should call the police.
it may be nothing, but we would rather be there and determine that than to not be called and have it turn into something seriously and drastically wrong.
We often assume women are the victims of domestic violence. Rod Pump from Clear Lake, Iowa, illustrates this tragedy can happen to men as well.
Rod Pump, thank you so much for being here and visiting with us today on the program. Our program today is about domestic abuse. And one of the things that we've learned is that the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Abuse has told us that in general, in any given year, typically in Iowa, there are 17,000 women who have been abused, and there are 800 men. You, in years past, have been one of those 800. Tell us what happened.
I think the numbers are higher. That's just what's going in. Those are the men that are seeking help. When I went through my ordeal, I did some statistical work myself, and at the time there were 860,000 nationally that were reporting, that violence, but they thought it was well over 1 million. Those are the men that chose to go for help. My ordeal pretty much lasted about 21 years when we got married, and it had just gotten to the point where I had to do something different. I had to end it, and because it was the future wasn't very good.
And when did it start?
It started pretty much at the beginning. I knew that she could be controlling, but you're in a new relationship, so you go with things. You don't see patterns at that point. But my first real incidents and I didn't even know that I was being abused, that it would become a pattern in this one isolated incident. But we were newlyweds, and one morning I woke up to her hitting me. I was asleep in bed, about 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I said, what are you doing? And she said, well, you were with that woman. What woman? Well, that woman. I said, there's no woman. Yeah, but in my dream, you were with that woman. So
it wasn't even real.
It wasn't even real. And come to find out, she had been up since about 6 o'clock in the living room, and she was just stewing about this. And it just escalated to she woke me up by hitting me. And I said, just don't ever do that again. I said, that didn't happen.
what are the types of things that people experience when they're a victim? It's controlling pieces, it's verbal. Give us a sense of what you experience.
Yeah, there are lots of aspects of it. There's the verbal, of course. You know, you're an idiot. Why did you do that? You shouldn't have done that. Why didn't you ask me? Generally, there's a lot of autonomy in a healthy relationship. You can do things without always having to ask your spouse or your significant other. So there was that. The verbal stuff was there. Physically, you know, it starts with a slap. It starts with a hit, maybe with it could simply be a simple snap of a towel. And I don't want to say that you know is a bad thing, but in an abusive situation, there's a lot of things like that. It's emotional. That's a very tricky thing. People who are abusive make you doubt your reality. And that's a real significant thing. You lose yourself in that over a period of time. And it's not just something that happens. It doesn't just drop. It's layers. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so that's why it takes a while for it to build up to realize that, oh, this is an abusive situation.
And when was that moment for you? When did you recognize that this is wrong? This is something that for your own health and welfare you needed to change?
Wow, I don't have a time.
Okay.
I think I don't have like that aha moment, that occurrence, that epiphany that said this is bad.
Did you ever fear for your life?
Yes. There were about 4 different times where she had a knife in her hand, and they were pointed at me.
It's harder for men, isn't it? You're supposed to be tough and strong, and spouses are usually smaller people.
Yeah.
And what's that dynamic like? And did you find anyone who was willing to believe you and help you?
All right. So the morning progresses. This incident progresses, and I thought, this is crazy, and I've got to change this because someone's going to die, and it was going to be me. And I said, this is crazy, and I went to the phone on the wall and I dialed 911. She put her finger on the plunger. All right, this isn't gonna work. I go out to the family room where there's another phone, and I go to dial 911. Well, she comes out and she has a carpet cutting blade in her hand. And I said, what are you doing? I mean, she's enraged. There's a fire in her eye. And I went to use the phone and it was dead because it was hooked up to the kitchen phone. She had taken that one off the hook, which is highly illegal. You can't prevent someone from calling 911. So I did get away from her. She threw the knife down. I came back out to the kitchen. I grabbed the pile of clothes that I had, which was a method that I used to prepare myself for a quick exit, and we can talk about that. But I got out of the house. I was literally running down my street, down the block here, in my boxers. It didn't bother me to go to the police. Mm-hmm. There is that big stigma that the police officers will laugh at you. You're a girly man if you do this. You're less of a man if you do this. Mm-hmm. And you're not. Absolutely not. 5'1" women that weigh 98 pounds carrying a butcher knife, that's a pretty powerful force. It is. Right. It's a very powerful force to deal with. Right. And that knife will cut you, mm-hmm. and you need to get away.
Mm-hmm. What can someone outside the relationship do if they're concerned about the behaviors in the relationship of friends of theirs mm-hmm. or family?
There are things that you can do. As a friend, don't judge them, because you're not there at 2 o'clock in the morning when things are happening. What you can do is say, I know things are kind of tough sometimes. I want to let you know that I am available to you 24/7. You can call me at any time.
You had this terrible experience in your life
mm-hmm.
that was very traumatic and very difficult, but life gets better. One of the things that you shared with me is that you want to let people know that you can get your life back after you make these calls for help and take steps to make changes in your life.
Yes.
How has life gotten better?
life does get better. Like my friends have said, we've gotten you back. You're more verbal. You're more gregarious. I'm still very, very active in the community. I look for things. I've been able to do things that I wasn't able to do in the relationship. Things, and that's part of that abusive thing. They monitor your time. They control who your friends. I didn't have a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends now. We go out. We get calls to do things. We're very social. Yes, it's tough in the beginning, but at the end, I have a wonderful relationship with my son that's actually improved, because of it. We're very strong. We're very tight, and he's just absolutely wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your story
Thank
with
you
us.
for coming. Glad to do it.
I started out my journey so full of hope for us. He was everything my heart desired, all that I could trust. It didn't take long for things to change, our lives to veer off course. Manipulation, power, control, all with no remorse. He shattered so much more than just my hopes and dreams. He reminded me I'm worthless and took all my self-esteem. In time, the pain became too much. I had to make a choice. Live in fear all my life, or somehow find my voice. Bruises fade away in time. The tears dried on my face. The scars, however, left behind, forever hold a place. Domestic violence is ugly, for that there is no doubt. I am living proof, however, there's always a way out. The days will not be easy, the light may seem too dim. Believe in you and know your strength is a blessing from within.
Thank you for joining us tonight as we explored the causes, effects, and responses to domestic violence. Join us Thursday, April 14th at 7 p.m. as we examine another compelling issue on the heart of the matter. With field reporter Donnie Rolls, I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham. Good night.